Well, I'd like to start off by asking you, you were obviously in the scene in the late 70s, early 80s, and yet it took you a while to make the film. Could you tell us the origin story of how this came to be?
Well, after Hurricane Sandy hit New York City in 2012, October 2012, the Lower East Side was flooded. And a few weeks after that, I went over to see my friend Alexis Adler, who's an embryologist and had lived with Jean-Michel from 79 to 80. And we all knew she lived with him. She had a mural he had painted in her bedroom, and a bathroom door, and the refrigerator door. And when I just went over to have a cup of tea, and she said, "Sarah, you know, I was really worried. I had totally forgotten 30 years ago I put away all this work he left at the house when he moved out. And it was under the flood part of the Lower East Side. It was in a bank vault." And she said, "I went there like 2 weeks ago with my daughter, and they couldn't find my card because it had been so long, and it was like they finally found like a handwritten card in the bank." And she went down there and she found over 60 works of his on paper and a notebook. And then she remembered she had put away a box of clothes that he had painted, and she found over 150 photographs she had taken of him. And I was one of the first people to see what she had unearthed from her past. And when I looked at it, I thought, oh man, this is so. All these things are clues into his later work. And also, I always wondered about his graphs and charts, and I realized that came from looking at her science books. And then I teased Alexis, and I said, "Was it like living with an elf, where you'd wake up every day and your clothes were painted, and your door, your walls were painted, and apparently under her floor are also probably some painted areas too. She had put a new floor down since he had lived there."
I mean, you knew him in those days. Did you see him as somebody with a special spark, or was he just another charming drifter?
Well, it was such a particular time, and there were so many interesting young people around. There were so many people, because you could live for nothing, and you could do your art, and he did have a kind of radiance. I mean, I think René Ricard said it very well when he called him Radiant Child in the article. I mean, he was very charismatic. You were very drawn to him. But, Diego Cortez said to me at one point, he said that time in New York, that short period in New York, which was such a zeitgeist of all different kinds of artists, was almost like Paris in the 19th century, at the turn of the century, into the 20s, or Berlin in the 30s. I mean, it was just a very, very particular moment. There were a lot of very talented people.
And how do you compare that to the art scene downtown now?
I don't know. There are these kids that I like that are really, really great, and they do a thing called Spring Break at the same time as the Armory Show in early March.
And you curate for them.
Yeah. And
I ran into you, and I was surprised because I didn't know that this was part of your repertoire.
Yeah, it's really fun to find, realize that somebody's a really great artist and they have no way of getting their signal out. And these kids have set up, they take over abandoned spaces. They started out at the Catholic school on Prince Street when it was abandoned, and that's where their first show was, and this is their 7th year. And then they were above the 34th Street post office. And actually I told Alexis, let's show some of your photographs and then show some of Jean's work and not publicize it and just see, let people discover it for themselves. And so actually it was great to watch these kids come in and go, wow, there's Jean, he's so young, and then they would go into the next room, and they were got to stand very close to the work and see the clothes that he had painted. And then the past 2 years it's been in the abandoned floors of the Condé Nast building off of 42nd Street. And this art fair has grown and grown. It's 150 curators now, and I think 300 to 400 artists, and it's so great for artists of all ages who are with each other, creating their space in these abandoned spaces, and also talking to the public, coming to see it.
Do you think it replicates the Times Square show?
It's the Godchild. It's definitely a relative of the Times Square show.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the other things you've curated. You did something recently with the artists of the film.
Well, actually, Eamon Bowles, who runs Magnolia, said, well, is there going to be an exhibit at the, in the spring or something? And I started thinking, well, there should be an exhibit in the spring. And I went to Happenings, which is on First Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. It's a small, not-for-profit gallery. And I said, I have this idea of all the artists that gave me work for the film of doing a show of their work. And the two people, Jane Friedman and Ted Ryder, both said to me, well, we're booked till 2020. And I said, well, take a look at these artists. Just check out the names. And they said, oh, I think we have an opening in May. So it opened in May, the same week as the film opened at IFC, and it's still running. They extended it through July, and it's going to a museum in Virginia in the fall.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, your film sort of replicates and imitates the energy, the scattershot energy of Jean-Michel, and that's so different from the rhythms and tones of your earlier films. I was wondering if this came about as part of your work in the editing room, or was this the spirit that you wanted to convey from day one?
Well, it's kind of the spirit of the time. It was sort of, everything was sort of collaged. And I remember Carla McCormick did a show at Gray Gallery of New York, 1974 to 1984. And because that was the first time I saw objectively what was really happening at that time. When I walked in that space and I saw that performance artists were informing musicians, and musicians were informing painters, and we were all germinating each other and all trying things and failing at things. And does that answer your question?
Yeah. Okay. Sarah's earlier narrative films have a more supernatural, surrealistic sort of edge to it. And I'm wondering if we're going to see that in your work in the future,
well,
those elements.
I feel like this movie, in a way, is like a ghost story. It's his ghost, but it's also the ghost of New York City that's no longer there. And I deal a lot with, I'm very interested in ghost stories and surreal, and things that are just slightly off realism. So I think that's just part of my milieu.
Did you, using your own critical judgment, why do you think his work resonates so powerfully today?
It's really astounding how he's really talking today about things, it's not, so little's changed in 30 years. I mean, that's he's addressing so many issues, and he's so relevant now as he was then. And there's a vibrancy in his paintings when you actually see his paintings and his work. And he was what I also learned from doing the film and looking at what Alexis's archive was, I realized he was a really sophisticated poet by the time he was 18 years old. And the way he would write, like on a legal sheet of paper, and he would write very specific, like, sentences, and then he'd cross words out that you could still read. But then leave the rest of the paper blank. I mean, that was all very intentional. There's something just, he's one of those people, one of those great artists who's sort of ahead of his time, during his time, in a way.
Sarah's first film was a short film called You're Not I, which is based on a Paul Bowles story. Absolutely remarkable, wonderful film. She deals with very very difficult stylistic mode, but handles it with a great sleight of hand. I think it's astonishing for a first-time director. Even a veteran director would have a hard time pulling that off. And I recommend that you see it. But it also has a lost and found story. You seem to specialize in things that have been buried for a while.
Maybe if you live long enough.
Yeah, and that you can whip out to the surface. So tell us a little bit about that story. It's such a great story.
Well, I finished the film in 1981, and it went all over the world. It was only 48 minutes long, and in the film business, it wasn't a short and it wasn't a feature. A short is under 30 minutes, and a feature is over 75 minutes. So people would go, well, why did you make a film that's 48 minutes? I mean, what kind of slot does that fit in? And I said, well, that's how the film cut. That's how the story cut and worked. And so it went all over the world, actually. And then there was a fire, and the negative and all the materials were destroyed. And that was like about 2008, 2009. And I was devastated, and I couldn't tell anybody who participated in the film. Couldn't even talk about it. And then I got a phone call in 2011 from the archivist who had been working on Paul and Jane Bowles's archive in Tangier, and they said, "We found a print of your film." And I had totally forgotten, because I had sent a print of my film for Paul Bowles to see. In 1982, there was a guy who was going to see Paul, and I asked him to bring him with Paul a 16 millimeter print of the film, because there was no VHS then or anything like that. And he hand carried it, and Paul watched it at the Cinematheque in Tangier, and it was off the original negative, so it was a very beautiful print. And they found the print underneath Paul and Jane's typewriters. And I couldn't afford anything but a cardboard box to put, a cardboard film container. And the archivist and I believe, because black and white is a very delicate film material, we believe that the cardboard box actually saved the film, because if I had been able to afford a metal box, the humidity and the weather in Tangier would have destroyed it. And the archivists were really, really nervous, and they were like, "Well, do you want your film back? I mean, it sort of belongs to Paul Bowles." And I said, "No, I gave it to Paul. It should stay in special collections, but let me access it so I can make a new HD copy and make a new negative off of it." And then New York Women in Film gave me money to restore it, and then it was shown at the Masterworks at the New York Film Festival. So that was 2011. So it must have been 2010 that the archivist called me.
Great story.
Yeah, and they've become my friends, really dear friends of mine. The two guys and they were also very close to Paul and Jane. So and then the film went to all these Paul Bowles celebrations for his centennial, and it was so great to meet all these people that knew them, and learn. I got to learn a lot more about him and also about Jane.
But beyond the work that you've done for yourself, you've also collaborated with your partner, Jim Jarmusch, in many different sort of ways, as a producer, a story by, he's sometimes an actress in his films. Could you talk a little bit about that collaboration?
Well, I started first working with Jim in 1979 when he made Permanent Vacation, and he needed 15 locations for free. And he said, "You have to go get me 15 locations." I was like, "Okay." It's like being pushed into a cold swimming pool. And then we made Then he shot my film You Are Not I. He was my cameraman, and then I produced Stranger Than Paradise for him, and because we're romantically involved, being a producer kind of took away from the beauty of our relationship, which was exchanging ideas. It started becoming about contracts and about very, daily grind stuff, and I do love to produce. I think it's very creative as well. But it was so great to just give that up with him and to go back into this mode of working with each other in terms of imagination and storytelling and ideas and things like that. So like when he made Only Lovers Left Alive, I had read this wonderful book by Mark Twain, which is one of the best books I've ever read about men and women, and it's called The Private Diaries of Adam and Eve. And I read that book and I gave it to Jim, and it's a very obscure sort of link to Only Lovers, but it was something that started that process, his thinking process on that. And then with Broken Flowers, that was an idea I had with my writing partner, Bill Radin. We had this idea of a guy who gets a letter from an old girlfriend saying, "I had a child with you," that he doesn't know about, who's grown up, who's going to come looking for you, who's grown up. So it's exchange of ideas, really.
But it's interesting, too, that you went from technical to creative and more emotional contributions with him.
Yeah, but I think even producing, when you're producing for no money, it's also that.
Yeah. So I'd like to open this up to questions. Anybody like to start off? Yes? Yes.
I thought that was an incredible portrait of that very special time and place. And when you say ghost story, I wondered, because his voice is not in the film, was that a conscious choice, or was that lack of material? And if it was conscious, can you talk about that?
There wasn't much audio of Sean between 78 and 81. I mean, what's occurred to me after, during or shortly after making the film was Downtown 81, which is a feature that stars Jean-Michel. They lost all the audio of that film, and it was dubbed in 2001, I think, with someone else's voice. So it's interesting that his voice is sort of, I mean, there are recordings of him, but it like with Radiant Child, it's later. It's a little later. So I was trying to really keep it focused within that 78 to 81 period. And then I started thinking about memory. And I've been thinking about this a lot. It's very hard to remember people's voices who have died. You remember visuals, you remember experiences, but you don't remember the voice. It's and that's just something I've been kind of mulling and thinking about recently.
Well, I actually love that it didn't have his voice. His presence, the strength of his presence comes through, I think, even more than if you had used it.
And he wasn't a real verbal guy. He was pretty quiet. He was kind of an observer. And that's how I remember him. Thanks, Renee.
Yes. Lana.
Over there or here? Congratulations, Sarah, on your movie. Great. Question: the title obviously is what his phrase about his own work. Does it also apply to your work? And why did you choose that as the title of your film?
I think because I love that he was so excited by ideas, and that I found it very interesting. I also learned by making this film the kind of people that when he was 16 and 17 that he was choosing to hang out with. And he sort of picked his own university, and he actually used to pretend like he was a student at the School of Visual Arts, and used to go up there and stuff. And I think, Boom for Real, because it was an expression of excitement, and it was that it just seemed like that's what I was, that this is. I mean, I find it very kind of a privilege to have been able to make a film about where an artist's formative years happened and having witnessed that. I mean, that's very rare that you actually get to see something that you or somebody has witnessed or been somehow involved with an artist of this kind of caliber who and what fed them, what inspired them. I mean, I think it's really interesting. He's hanging out with Luc Sant. He's hanging out with, Diego. He's hanging out with Freddie. He's picking up information from all these places, And he was a little younger,
He was
One
an
more thing.
investigator.
Did the title apply to you also? Do you relate to that, the Boom for Real?
I guess so. I mean, I love ideas and thought and exchange.
I enjoyed the film very much, and I just wanted to verify something that comes out in the film where he says that he knows that he will be famous. I just finished a film called A Few Things Basquiat Did in School, and in my case the school is 6th grade, and it's based around an interview with a woman who had him in his art squad when he was 11 at PS 101 in Brooklyn. And the best part of my conversation with her is where she makes a mistake in quoting him. At first she says, yes, and he would say, I want to be a famous cartoonist. And she corrects herself. That's not what he said. What he said was, I'm going to be a famous cartoonist. And it's so interesting to me. There's this theory of deep practice in music where they wonder why some kids can do better with 15 or 20 minutes of practice that other kids can't do an hour and a half. And they found out that what they all have in common is that they cannot imagine their future without being with that instrument. And you get that sense that that was true of Basquiat. He just knew that he was going to draw, and that he would be famous at it. So I love the fact that that's brought out in the film. And it's just a beautiful piece of work also. I really admire it. It's terrific.
Thank you. I love Al Diaz. Al Diaz took that wonderful picture of Jean with the beret when he was like 16. And I said to Al, you know, what did he think was like? He was Che Guevara and stuff. He said, oh, no, sir, that's what he thought an artist looked like.
Sarah? Oops. Hello. Sarah, that was a wonderful film. Congratulations. I
Thank
have
you.
a question. You know, Anina Noze, the gallerist, did she not play earlier on a role in his career?
She was
Anina
right
Noze.
after this, right after PS1.
Oh, I see. It was after.
Yeah,
Oh.
I had to kind of, because he's so spider-webbed so many places, I really had to.
Okay, thank you.
My turn. Sarah, thank you so much. It's a wonderful film. I had two questions. First of all, can you talk a little bit about the soundtrack, because it was kind of fantastic, and just out of curiosity, what happened to all the artwork that you found after 30 years? I'm curious how that all played out. Speaking of art world stuff.
Alexis's archive. Well, after we showed the work at the Spring Break Art Fair, my sound, because I was shooting there, I was thinking, you know, I was just shooting reactions of the kids, you know, people seeing him and then the art. And then my sound guy came up to me and he goes, do you think it's all right if I ask Alexis? I mean, my cousin is the CEO of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, and I think they'd be very interested in this work. And I said, you got to, please tell Alexis. So there was a huge article in the New York Times about it. It opened at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. It's traveled to the Cronwell in Detroit. It's going to St. Louis. There was a wonderful book published called Basquiat Before Basquiat, which actually complements this film, because it's only exclusively about Alexis's collection. And I think it's going to Europe next year. So it's been moving around. And then the soundtrack, I mean, this film was sort of made in a very similar spirit as to the way we made films in the late 70s, because I didn't have any money. And people gave me material, and I wrote letters to like Martin Rev in order to get Suicide, and you know, it's very that's why I call the people who gave me archives collaborators, because I feel like we all made this film together. I couldn't have made it without them. And it's true of the music as well, that people really participated and really helped. And I think it's because, you know, some people knew me, some people did not know me, but they knew that I was a witness along with them. So they wanted a witness to tell our story. So.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear? It's Gina.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. I'm glad I waited and didn't go to the Angelica and came here instead, because now I get to see you. Congratulations. I had no idea I would be so affected by this film. I mean, I think I feel like a ghost, and I'm crying. Thank you. I mean, it's an amazing historical document, and I love the period that you focused on, pre-1983, let's say. This was pre-1983. I think his rocket really took off around 83, do you think?
No, it was 80, right after this, like 81.
81.
82, when Anina Noce got involved. As
That
soon
was
as he
81.
sold his painting to, you know, Henry Gels,
Okay.
you know, because he was like, he put the stamp of like, this guy is important in the art world.
Okay.
As soon as he bought that painting.
Okay. Did you think to get in touch with Paige Powell?
No, but she was later.
We'll talk later.
Yeah, but you know, I don't approve of those photos she was showing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
You
Can we
know,
talk
I think
later?
that's very exploitative.
Oh,
I-
wow.
I'm
Interesting.
sorry, but
In Portland.
what?
In Portland.
They're not important. That's not
No,
important
no,
that
no.
the public see
Portland,
that.
Oregon. Portland, Oregon.
What, Gina?
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon, what? Portland. What about Portland?
I thought you were
When
referring to the photo show in Portland, Oregon.
No,
at
no, the
at
Page Palace show
museum.
that she had in New York City, where it was all these naked pictures
Oh,
of
I
him
didn't
and
see that.
stuff like that, where he's on
Oh.
drugs, and it's like it was
Oh.
really.
Oh,
I didn't go to the show.
Oh, I had no idea.
Unfortunately, somebody like showed it. I got the invitation, and I was.
Oh, I had no
I,
idea.
I said, "This is stuff that you do when you're in
Oh,
your 20s,
oh.
and you don't show other people."
Oh, well, I guess I'm glad I missed that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gina.
What a great piece of storytelling. My God. Just great. Just great. And it's in such a perfect style for, I think it's the way he would have had it told. It's just terrific. Thank you so much.
Last week at the Southampton Arts Center, Lana Jokel presented her wonderful film on Andy Warhol that was shot 45 years ago also, sort of a little later than this period. And Bob Colacello in the conversation afterwards was talking about Basquiat as sort of showing up at the factory and before he became famous. And everybody was a little nervous about him. And then once his rocket took off, he was very welcome, and he and Andy started to exchange art, and he was absorbed into the factory as much as he wanted to be. And it was fun to see tonight the way you dealt with the fact that some people thought that Andy was passé at that time, but these graffiti artists still admired him. And
I think a lot of us came to the city because of the factory.
Yeah.
And this idea of working with a group of people, making films, making art, making music. I mean, I think it was inspirational to a lot of us.
yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Oh, thanks so much. It's still in theatrical release, so it's still. I'm sorry. I'm a few places. I'm going to do the show that we did in New York is going to this museum in Virginia, and I'll be showing the movie there and talking and things like that. Yeah.
Where did I don't know if I really need to use this, but the early footage of New York at that period of time, I'm just curious where you picked that up.
That was from a lot of different filmmakers, where you see like that dog that's sitting in that building. You don't even know how the dog got up there. And there's like the Samo graffiti. That's like Tessa Hughes freelance work. And then there was Jacob Burkhardt. And then, of course, James Nares is the swinging ball.
Oh, yeah, such a great image.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful image. I mean, they were filmmakers mainly, and then I also got access to the archive of the City of New York, and some of it was like a few things I really had to have that belonged to NBC, but it cost me a little. Unfortunate,
And then you just found all the we'd go back to certain images of Jean-Michel, and you just gathered those.
Well, that was Michael Hallman's footage. That wonderful
see.
Super 8 experimental footage. That was Michael Hallman's footage.
Okay.
So it was really like I felt like a squirrel, where you're like gathering nuts and then you put it together. And people were extremely generous with me with this. So
And it was wonderfully edited. It was a wonderful film.
thank you. That's
Thank
Adam Kernitz. He's great. Yeah.
Any more questions? Sarah, could you tell us if you're working on a new script, or are you doing an adaptation, or what is your immediate future?
Well, I have this project that is because children are all like watching Pixar right now. They're not seeing live action films, and I have a great love of fairy tales, and I have a series of metamorphosis tales I would like to do for children, and using the effects in camera and through shadow and light, and metamorphosis animal to human, human to animal, that are based on folk tales from all over the world. And then I have a story that I just invented that would kind of tie it all together to make one feature. That's kind of, and I remember telling my lawyer that I wanted to do that, and she said, nobody puts money into children's films. And I'm like, well, the film world is shooting themselves in the foot if we don't get kids to the cinema to start seeing stuff that's not a cartoon, you know. And then I wanted to do with that I wanted to do the original folktale, the shooting script, and then a book on how to this would be a book as well that would tell how the effects are done, because I'm very interested in camera, pre-optical printer effects, and I think that, and children are very interested in effects and how to achieve magic, you know. So that's one of my projects, and then I have this idea of a series of essay films that I'd like to do, because I know so many amazing people, and I'd like to do a series of especially people who are getting older and that may not be around much longer, that I'd love to shoot. And now I own my own camera, so they can't stop me now.
Well, that's all good news. Thanks so much for being
Thanks,
with us,
Wendy.
and thank you for
Thanks so much,
staying.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.